With the Club World Cup the previous summer and the World Cup this upcoming summer being held in the United States, many association football fans outside the country, as well as within, began to ask the question, well, what's the football pyramid in the US like? And the answer is, it's complicated. Just as a quick aside, I'll be using the term association football throughout this video, just because while football is the widely accepted name for the sport, me saying American football over and over and over again will likely confuse both people who are fans of football and, well, football. And, well, the term is technically correct. So I hope you can accept this decidedly unsatisfactory middle ground for anybody on either side of the calling the sport football/soccer divide. One of the provisions for the US to host the 1994 World Cup was to have a D1 Pro Association Football League, a stipulation that reflected the vacuum of top division association football that affected the American game throughout the turn of the 90s. At the time, the highest level of play was the Second Division American Professional Soccer League. While it was the highest league in the country and had plans to launch a D1 league for the World Cup bid, the MLS won out and the APSL struggled to maintain its status as a coast-to-coast professional league. The ill-fated NASL laid the groundwork for D1 Pro Association football in the US throughout the mid-20th century, but it had collapsed as a D1 league by 1984 thanks to a recession. The NASL was a result of the merger between the National Professional Soccer League and the confusingly named United Soccer Association, whose acronym is USA. Both of these leagues were just uniquely shit enough to be American, kicking off the same year in 1967. The USA was FIFA sanctioned while the NPSL was not, since the NPSL refused to pay the league fees to the US Soccer Football Association and thus was labeled a renegade league by FIFA. Players therefore received sanctions and penalties for signing for an NPSL team, leading to a low standard of play that scared away fans from stadiums as well as over television. The NPSL's 2-year CBS broadcasting deal was cut short after the first and last season of play due to broadcasting revealing empty stadiums, with low-quality foreign players that didn't understand the American sporting audience, which led to dwindling viewership numbers. However, most unforgivably, the league ordered referees to call fouls at times when commercials should be shown, which I imagine would have alienated a large number of association football fans who are used to absolutely no commercial breaks except for at halftime. At a time when association football fans could expect 1 or 2 substitutions allowed, and mostly due to injury, the intentionality of referees and players setting up extended breaks in play for commercial breaks would have no doubt enraged association football fans in America. Although fans of other American sports probably looked at them and wondered what the problem was. The car crash that was the NPSL's 1967 run makes the USA seem pretty good in comparison, but just you wait. The USA had FIFA sanctioning, yes, but it was composed entirely of European and South American teams rebranded to match American localities. Teams hailing from Dundee, Cagliari, Montevideo, and Stoke were expected to field teams on a completely different continent for a theoretically untapped goldmine of American Association football fans who were enamored by England's victory at the 1966 World Cup and the documentary goal that followed. However, the vast distances to travel, combined with the fact that the USA ran a summer calendar, led to the teams involved treating the league as little more than a training camp, frequently not fielding their best players. So of course, one league that packaged the beautiful game on broadcast for corporate interests, and the other composed of teams and players that couldn't give less of a shit about the game in America aside from the perceived money to be made, merged together in the winter of 1967 to form the North American Soccer League, kicking off in the summer of 1968. Now, the NASL had some wacky rules, like the increasing franchise fees to join the league as the league itself grew financially, a hockey-style penalty, a 35 yards offsides line dictating where offsides would be enforced instead of the halfway line like the one you'd see in the youth tournament games on EAFC, the elimination of draws in the 1974 season replaced with the penalty shootout, and the awarding of an additional point for each goal scored regardless of the outcome of the match. The NASL had some wacky rules. Through its first decade, the league was essentially semi-pro, with many players holding other jobs, but nevertheless experienced growth, with average attendances growing to a little under 8,000 by 1974, with a few teams averaging over 10,000. If we are to ignore its top division status since the rules for what constitutes a D1 league have changed in the decades to come, then I wonder how the NASL's attendances stack up compared to modern American Association football leagues that feature a large number of semi-pro players. As a coast-to-coast league, it would be interesting to compare to leagues like the ones in the USL structure. Anyways, the 1975 season was a landmark one. It was not due to steady growth that the league had experienced up to that point. In June of that year, the New York Cosmos signed footballing royalty and, up to that point, one club man, Pelé. His signing triggered a tidal wave of attention levied on the burgeoning league, with the Cosmos averaging 40,000 plus fans at Giants Stadium during their heyday. Warning signs were definitely there, since the league as a whole never averaged over 15,000 fans, and some teams averaged less than 5,000 fans per game. However, fueled by disco, cocaine, and whatever else he did in the mid-70s, wait for Star Wars to come out, the league pushed those negative thoughts out of their minds and continued to add expansion franchises, buoyed by the viral attention that Pelé brought to the league. It poached many teams from the Second Division American Soccer League, which was seen as a possible competitor to the NASL. The Cosmos made other teams in the league decidedly cosmopolitan, as they generated transfer intrigue for big-name aging stars so that other teams could have their Pelé. The Los Angeles Aztecs followed this trajectory, signing George Best in 1976 and Johan Cruyff in 1979. A high point for the league was the 1978 Soccer Bowl that saw a sellout crowd of over 73,000 at Giants Stadium watch Pelé, Beckenbauer, and co. beat the Tampa Bay Rowdies 3-1 to lift the first ever back-to-back NASL titles in league history for the Cosmos. However, by the turn of the decade, the league began to reel from its overexpansion, high salaries for foreign players, and shocks in oil prices causing a recession in the American economy in early 1980. The league came under scrutiny by fans of the U.S. national team after manager Walt Chizowich
Can we cut that out?
blamed their poor performance in the 1982 World Cup qualifying on the NASL for not developing enough American talent for their squad, despite Canada doing better with a squad full of NASL players. However, the inability for the league to continue buying big-name stars due to compounding financial issues drove attendances down as the quality of league play dropped, causing an all-too-familiar fall from grace that the NPSL experienced nearly 20 years earlier. When combined with lawsuits from the NASL Players Association over payments for their indoor season, and the poor vetting of franchise owners who left as quickly as they came during expansion, led to a collapse of the league, ultimately playing its last season in 1984. All this is to say that the MLS launched in 1996, creating a vacuum of top division association football in the country that had lasted for over a decade, seeing the money available to them through the cash cow that would flow from World Cup fever. Imagine, it's the year 1994, and the US Soccer Federation, as was the style of the time, decided to kneecap American Association football. This was the year that the MLS was granted Division I status, and the peak of the American Association football pyramid was formed amid the frenzy of the 1994 World Cup. But wait, we gotta back up a little bit to understand why exactly this structure is farcical in nature and actively strangling the grassroots growth of the game in an attempt to monopolize association football in the US. Take us back to the year 1990. A little after the Nintendo Game Boy celebrated its first birthday, a landmark election took place in the context of the development of American Association football in the 21st century, when Alan Rothenberg beat out Werner Fricker to become president of the US Soccer Federation. Fricker had been president for the last 6 years and had been around the summit of the Federation for a decade prior to becoming president. Fricker's most notable contributions to the American game around this time included being president when the US was awarded the 1994 World Cup hosting privileges, as well as playing a significant role in returning the US men's team to the World Cup after a 40-year absence stretching from 1950 to 1990 by hiring Bob Gansler, the Federation's first full-time coach, because you wouldn't want a country that's nowhere near qualifying get a host spot. Side note, what the fuck? How would it take that long? Of course we weren't a serious federation if we didn't have a full-time coach. Oh, and of course, the amateur extension of the US Open Cup bears his namesake, and you can't forget about the Werner Fricker Cup, or I'll kill you! Fricker was defeated in 1990 by Rothenberg, and he was later appointed by FIFA as the director of the 1994 World Cup, overseeing record-shattering crowds and massive stadia across the country. A great advert for the nascent MLS that was set to kick off in a couple years' time. The establishment of 3 divisions in 1994 has done little to grow the scope of the American game, since they are financially restrictive, with the only hope of promotion coming in the form of a franchise agreement with a higher league to allow your club to operate at a higher division. The most recent user of this promotion structure is the USL, who operate 2 professional leagues in the 2nd and 3rd division, bringing Lexington SC and North Carolina FC from USL League 1 to the USL Championship. There are also examples of the MLS making similar moves, even from competing leagues. The MLS established Phoenix franchises in the form of the Portland Timbers from the USL Division I and APSL A-League, and the Seattle Sounders from the NASL in the early 2000s. In the 2010s, the MLS continued to try its hand at resurrecting franchises through Orlando City SC and FC Cincinnati, the former through a messy USL franchise acquisition, and the latter being the product of the US Open Cup, showcasing the richness and passion of lower league American Association football, through subsequent record-breaking attendances throughout the team's USL era. Due to the lack of cooperative promotion and relegation except in the case of franchise promotions, this leads to a scenario where the further down the pyramid you go, the more leagues compete for the title of the Premier League in a given division. For example, as of the end of 2025, the MLS is the only Division I Association Football League and the USL Championship is the only Division II league. However, once you hit the 3rd division, there emerges competition. The USL operates a Division III league, USL League 1, but so does the MLS Next Pro. However, MLS Next Pro is largely made up of reserve teams of MLS sides, while USL League 1 has clubs independent from championship sides, with the prospect of promotion and relegation between the leagues a possibility in the future, which obviously would not work under the MLS Next Pro structure of second teams with a smattering of more independent teams. There's also NISA, but that's its own hot mess and needs more time dedicated to it, but they also operate the 3rd tier of American Association football. The U.S. Soccer Federation does not sanction any league below Division III, however, this does not mean that a semi-professional and amateur association football scene does not exist in the U.S., but quite the opposite. However, this does lead to even more competition, sadly, and really the 4th division is the lowest you can go where there's a comprehensive understanding of how leagues stack up to each other, because the 4th division is the lowest level that national level play exists. While these leagues are highly regionalized and split into conferences on conferences on conferences, they nevertheless compete for a multi-state trophy with teams from conferences across the country angling to win the same silverware. The leagues I can think of off the top of my head at the 4th division of American Association football include the APSL, UPSL, NPSL, USL League 2, NISA Nation, and the newly formed League for Clubs. If you thought that was confusing, just wait till I tell you that this APSL is different from the earlier APSL. The APSL, NPSL, NISA Nation, and League for Clubs are all sanctioned by the U.S. Adult Soccer Association, or USASA, the premier governing body for lower-level association football in the U.S., with a mission of assisting member organizations and their communities. UPSL and USL League 2 are not sanctioned by the USASA, with USL League 2 being an explicitly U23 league, however one with a much broader footprint and therefore a better connection with local fan bases than leagues like MLS Next Pro, see Vermont Green, Ballard FC, etc. And quite frankly, calling the APSL a national league is a little premature, considering they are an East Coast regional league. But with the recent announcements at the time of recording of the Pine Tree Conference in Maine, and more interestingly, the Trinity Conference in Texas, the APSL is clearly trying to expand west while also plugging in their holes in their East Coast representation and their roots. However, you can insert your own regional league here, like the Midwest Premier League or the Cascadia Premier League. I just know less about these leagues compared to the APSL. Below the 4th division are state leagues, which unfortunately do not have the same fan culture within their respective states as one might expect from similar competitions like in Brazil or the regional leagues of Germany. But this isn't to say that state leagues in the US don't have fan bases or history, but quite the opposite. The Cosmopolitan Soccer League in the APSL structure is one of the oldest leagues in the country, hosting many historic clubs. My somewhat local club, Kingston Stockade FC of the League for Clubs, I estimate averages around 850 fans at home games, and I've attended many games that hugged the 1,000 fan mark last season. While the likes of MLS Commissioner Don Garber would scoff at attendances like that, I had some of my most fun and memorable fan experiences at Stockade games, despite going to many MLS games throughout the years. And you could turn to me and say, well then go to your game and MLS fans will go to theirs. And yeah, sure, you could talk my ear off about supply and demand, but the problem with a league like the MLS is that they seem hell-bent on preventing lower leagues from attaining any sliver of the wealth generated from association football in this country. We have a Frankenstein's monster of an association football pyramid that is kept alive by the almighty dollar. For as much as the MLS and its shill sniffs its own farts over how much the league has grown the game, what metric is this based on? Because since the creation of the modern association footballing division breaks as considered by the US Soccer Federation in 1994, there has been an active stifling of American association football clubs who find themselves within the lower levels of the league pyramid. The difference between the MLS and previous top division leagues like the NASL is the manner in which they throw their weight around to achieve the outcomes they want. They use their influence in domestic and CONCACAF federations to make sure MLS clubs get all the silverware and the revenue streams that come from them. For example, following Lionel Messi's transfer from PSG to Inter Miami in the summer of 2023, the MLS had a shock to the system when Miami's poor start to the season led the star-studded team to a second-bottom finish in the Eastern Conference. But fear not, Messi was still able to lift a trophy in his debut season, lifting the Leagues Cup against Nashville SC. What's the Leagues Cup, you might be asking? Well, it is a trophy contested between MLS and Liga MX teams created in 2019. Now, putting aside the fact that the trophy is ugly as sin, it is also a farcical competition that shows the weight that the MLS pulls in regional sport. This is because despite the fact that it is contested between teams of two different leagues representing three of the biggest countries in North America, no games are allowed to be held in Mexico. So all Liga MX teams are forced to play every single game in the competition away from home, while MLS teams can reasonably expect a home match since the only time they play away is if they face another MLS team. Why is the Leagues Cup important though? Because it offers spots in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the revenue sources from the CONCACAF Champions Cup are anywhere near what you'd expect from the UEFA Champions League, specifically the proportion of the winnings compared to the value of MLS and Liga MX teams as a whole. What I am going to tell you, though, is that while we are still hanging on to continentally based elite level competition by the skin of our teeth, looking at you, Barcelona and Miami match, the CONCACAF Champions Cup is seen as the final frontier for MLS teams looking to establish association footballing dominance on the continent. Because while they could say they're the best league, and they very well might be at this point, success in the Champions Cup allows them to turn to a war chest of international trophies to back up this claim, despite the fact that they rig the competition in their favor at every opportunity. Now, this could touch on a broader issue of geopolitics, but what I see when looking at the slots available to the clubs for the 2024 CONCACAF Champions Cup, there is a heavy bias towards mainland leagues, specifically those in North America. Liga MX has 6 spots, the MLS has 5, and the Canadian Premier League has 2. What also needs to be factored in, however, is that on top of these spots, additional spots are awarded for the Leagues Cup, Open Cup, and Canadian Championship, all of whom are dominated by MLS teams. The main problem with this is that the other regions of North America, Central America, and the Caribbean only see representation from their respective regional cup competitions, none from domestic league play. Here you can see a localization of what is happening in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, the lower divisions of American Association football, and even world football more broadly. Teams from Central America and the Caribbean compete for small numbers of CONCACAF Champions Cup spots that are dependent on their performance in their respective regional cup competitions. And cup play is famously unpredictable, a sentiment I'm sure is shared by many association football fans around the globe. The result is that the teams with the most resources, better facilities, simply more players, better scouts, etc., become financially stronger after receiving funds for qualifying for the Champions Cup, which they reinvest into their already strong resources, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where the best teams consistently occupy the money-making spots in the competition and leave the rest of their respective leagues behind. This self-fulfilling prophecy is one that the MLS has tried to rectify through their closed league system, but this comes at the cost of being a monopoly and acting as one in such a vibrant and fundamentally working-class system that is association football. A key example of this behavior came in the winter of 2023 when the MLS announced that it would not be fielding any teams in the US Open Cup for the next cycle, citing fixture congestion. Now, class, shall we review the number of trophies the MLS has injected into the American Association Football ecosystem since its inception? Let's go!
MLS Cup 1996, Canadian Championship 2008, Campeones Cup 2018, Leagues Cup 2019.
From limited tournaments with just a couple brackets to full-on knockout tournaments with group stages, these listed competitions have added onto a season that extends every year due to the expansion of the MLS. None of which, however, offer open competition with lower division clubs, a feature that has become a staple of domestic cup competition in every corner of the globe. Something that only the US Open Cup currently offers for teams in the US, as well as being one of the oldest trophies in American sport, one that creates synergy with previous eras of American Association football. This isn't even considering the multiple cup competitions that many lower division association football clubs in the US compete in on top of league play, for semi-pros and amateurs. But I'm sure a professional athlete competing in the MLS can't hang though. US Soccer Federation, to their credit, denied this ridiculous request, demanding that MLS teams play in the 2024 edition of the tournament. A compromise was reached where only 8 MLS first teams out of a possible 29 decided to take part, the further 9 MLS Next Pro sides taking up the rest of the MLS's representation. Beyond this insult, the top 8 teams in the MLS did not participate due to their participation in the 2024 CONCACAF Champions Cup, so it wasn't even the MLS's best teams that decided to compete. The build-up to that year's Open Cup final was really unlike any other, and not really for the right reasons. Every round is me hoping to God that a lower division club advanced, and as the competition reached its climax, MLS sides seemed to prove themselves too dominant. Only one side in the semifinals hailed from below the first division, with USL Championship side Indy 11 falling to Sporting Kansas City 2-0. After MLS sides had the majority of hosting privileges instead of a random draw like it had been for a decade. Again, we see the effects of concentrating money at the top, because while the MLS had financial rules in place that theoretically create competition within the league, since there's no cooperation with the lower divisions of American Association football, there is a pooling of resources in the first division that never trickles down to the lower leagues by automatic relegation and the associated parachute payments and the like. This results in first division teams just being more technically, physically, and tactically fit than their lower league counterparts, especially the deeper the individual games get, as well as the deeper into the tournament you go. This has created the framework for the stretching of the truth that is central to the MLS's dealings with lower division teams and leagues. To really get to the meat and potatoes of why the American pyramid should be amazed that I'm even referring to it as a pyramid, we should take a look at how it developed compared to, say, the English system. In the Anglosphere, comparing and contrasting the American and English pyramids is fairly understandable. The comparisons get complicated even further if you take Nicholas Lane Jackson's words to mean anything, who wrote in 1899 that famed Football League and Aston Villa FC founder William McGregor got his idea for guaranteed fixtures between professional clubs from American baseball. Although this claim is disputed, mostly from McGregor himself, who said he got the idea from Jiminy Cricket or something. Hitting balls with sticks aside, let's get back to the discussion. Anyway, so the divisions in England were largely formed through mergers of existing regional leagues that steadily represented a larger and larger portion of the country, with the Football League at the top awarding spots in their league in the form of a vote when compared to existing Football League squads who displayed poor performances in the previous season, eventually replaced with automatic promotion and relegation around the turn of the 20th century. This stands in stark contrast to the development of the American pyramid, which in many ways operates as if the Victorian era of selecting teams for top division status never ended. What we've seen throughout the NASL and MLS eras is that the D1 League will select teams from lower divisions to compete in their division to meet league expansion goals. However, instead of teams being chosen for sporting merit or whatever other things you value in a football club in Victorian England, oftentimes American D1 leagues looking to add expansion franchises are mostly focusing on market potential and the risk of leaving a popular team with a competing league. The NASL and the MLS hope for a snowballing effect, creating more and more interest in their leagues, and while this may be the case, it comes at the cost of robbing lower divisions of the teams that the lower divisions created and or nurtured. MLS Commissioner Don Garber expressed his displeasure for promotion and relegation in the US back in 2015, when he stated that a franchise that had invested billions of dollars would be hard done to have to spend next season playing in Chattanooga on a crappy field in front of 4,000 people, essentially no one to him, for a shitty season the previous year. Foul language aside, who possibly would use hyperbole to make a point? What? There are clear holes in this argument. He concedes that promotion and relegation were established in the early days of association football to create competition, but his focus on the funds of things shows his inability to really engage with the lower levels of the game and a genuine disinterest in grassroots growth. Because the MLS structure fundamentally focuses on major metropoles, there are invariably places where talent exists that won't be found on the MLS's radar, if not for cooperative promotion and relegation. Promotion and relegation opens up access to the funds of higher divisions, as intra-league transfers are common in pretty much any association football league in the world, which opens up the rosters of recently relegated teams to the rest of the lower league. This allows smaller scale clubs to invest in local youth infrastructure, which will cast a much wider net across the country, as there could theoretically be hundreds or thousands of clubs with youth teams if the team density of places like England or Germany can be replicated. This isn't feasible for people like Don, since he needs to see economic opportunity to decide to plant roots in a town. But fortunately, not everybody thinks like Don, and allowing for growth up a national pyramid via regional leagues would allow the wealthy local with some spare capital and a crazy dream to create a football club to make their town proud. My biggest problem with the finance argument against promotion and relegation is that the argument only looks at things from the top down and purposely ignores the concept of parachute payments. Because from a financial perspective, would it not make more sense to start at the bottom of a pyramid where league fees and overall costs would be at their lowest than to invest $1 billion into a top division franchise that may fizzle out in terms of actually competing for MLS titles once the new team bounce ends after a season or two? Wouldn't it be easier to stand out as an organization that has their shit together, starting at the bottom with teams that can't compete financially? Wouldn't it be more exciting from a fan's perspective to move up the tables and have new competition every year during the initial climb and even after a fall, creating interest in ticket sales? All this is to say that, with the lack of cooperative promotion and relegation between leagues from different divisions, there is a cascading situation where lower league clubs are systematically blocked out of promotion to a higher division based on arbitrary standards decided by the leagues in power, with the blame pointed higher and higher the lower down the leagues you go. At the end of the day, the US Soccer Federation decides to break between divisions, and leagues within said divisions are responsible for the admittance and administration of teams. And since the US Soccer Federation, like most things, is run by money, and the MLS makes the most, the entire American Association football world from an administrative perspective revolves around the MLS. This is why the league can maintain its Division I status within US Soccer Federation despite pulling out of the US Open Cup. It's why the league can make up a new trophy every year, including ones that invite Mexican teams but forces them to play every single game in the US. It's why it has FIFA sanctioning despite going against every strand of integrity the sport has remaining and breaking nearly all of its rules. However, all is not lost concerning the development of the American Association Football Pyramid, as more and more lower leagues adopt promotion and relegation into their own ecosystems. I already touched on the USL's plans to integrate promotion and relegation into their leagues in the future, but many 4th Division leagues have been doing just that for years. UPSL has promotion and relegation, with each regional conference having usually 2 divisions, one where a regular season title results in national playoff berths, and a lower one where winning the title means promotion to the higher league. While this is a legitimate method of implementing promotion and relegation, it has no apparatus to engage with even lower regional teams and integrate them into the UPSL structure. This is where the APSL succeeds in my opinion, as a heavy focus on their infrastructure is integration with state and local feeder leagues. APSL conferences are created, and once they hit a healthy size, any new applicants to a specific APSL conference must enter through the affiliated feeder leagues and earn their way to the APSL through sporting merit. However, this has resulted in slower growth. Playing its first season in 2020-2021 under the name Eastern Premier Soccer League, as a partnership between the Cosmopolitan Soccer League from NYC and the Maryland Major Soccer League, the APSL has grown to have around 50 teams from across states from the Northeast to Georgia. In contrast, since the UPSL grew from a regional league for the greater Los Angeles area in 2011, it has added over 400 teams in conferences from coast to coast by 2022. While the numbers sound promising, the APSL seems to have their heads screwed on the most straight in terms of building a genuine association football pyramid. Because having promotion and relegation within your own leagues is still a closed league, there are just more teams involved. What I keep coming back to in my admittedly limited research is that I'm not entirely sure that American sports owners totally get the appeal of association football, and I think this is why leagues throughout the years have struggled to consistently mimic the players, teams, atmospheres, stadia, and overall feeling of predominantly European and South American clubs. The fact of the matter is, association football clubs by and large are established to represent a specific community and oftentimes have working class roots. The low barrier to entry for the sport, requiring just a ball roughly the size of a basketball on an open field, compounds on the accessibility of the sport for working class people. While the framework for rules and pyramids have always largely been controlled by those with wealth, the democratic spirit of competition in a league structure with fixed schedules and consequences for losing has managed to create the framework for the balance between wealth classes in the sport. I just keep getting the impression that American owners just see the relationship between themselves and American Association football fans and sports fans in general as more like the one between the owner and clientele at like a Waffle House or an Applebee's, where you cater to whatever gets you the most butts and seats compared to creating high quality, delicious meals because they enjoy cooking. They have no interest in building a national league that represents the unique cultures and perspectives of the people who live in the country. Just whatever gives them an extra zero on their bank account and whatever gets them to stop being made fun of by every other sports owner in the country. And while there are times when we as Americans definitely act like drones for quick packaged entertainment, I like to believe that we deserve a little more. We deserve to have vibrant local leagues, derbies in every corners of the country, and a genuine representation of our localities beyond what the MLS allows. Because we're Americans, damn it, and god damn it, if I don't want this glorious sport to be enjoyed from sea to shining sea! Maybe I should quit while I'm ahead.